change our lives. We need to move somewhere. We need to go. If we're unmarried, well, we need to go and get married and start a family if we want to serve the Lord. Or contrary wise, if we're married and then you come to the Lord, well, we need to change things there to serve. Well, no, Paul is reminding them to serve as you are called, serve in the state which you are called. He goes on to say, if you're a slave, well, serve while being a slave, and if you're a free man, remember that you are Christ's slave. You have a master in Christ, and use your freedom to serve Him. And he goes on to say, where we left off last time in verse 23, he reminds them, saying that you were bought at a price. Therefore, do not become slaves of men. So this is, again, reiterating the point that just as the principle is in marriage, man's body is not his own, but his wife's, and a wife's body is not her own, but their husband's. Well, that marriage picture is the picture of Christ's redemption and the relationship that we have with Him. He is our husband, and we the church are His bride. And therefore, we were bought at a price. But so he warns us now: don't go and get entangled with somebody that didn't purchase you. Don't become slaves then of men. And this can mean a whole host of things, as we'll see examples of here in our text today. So we're going to start off with verse 25 now. Verse 25 of 1 Corinthians chapter 7. He says, "Now concerning virgins, I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in His mercy has made trustworthy." So now this is, he says concerning virgins, this is concerning unmarried women, young unmarried women. And he goes on to say, he says, I have no, just like he said a few verses earlier, where he can teach on things that Christ taught specifically regarding these issues, he will first refer to Christ's words and to Christ's teachings. But he's saying, well, now the Lord didn't touch on this specific issue, but he's saying, yet I give this judgment as one whom the Lord in His mercy has made trustworthy. And you see, this is a mark of a faithful teacher, a mark of a faithful apostle that Paul was. And we have to be wary of people that come trying to say that, well, they're trustworthy, but they do have a commandment from the Lord. They saw a vision, they saw a dream, they saw something else like that. Well, even Paul is saying, well, hey, I have no commandment to give you, but the Lord has in His mercy made him trustworthy. Therefore, He's going to teach doctrinal things. He's going to teach things that are in accordance with God's teaching and in accordance with His word. And we can be assured, just as these Corinthians, he was reassuring them that what he is going to teach is trustworthy, that this is what God would want taught as well. So now, verse 26, he says, I suppose, therefore, that this is good because of the present distress. So now he mentions this here, present distress. The present distress, we're not told, it's something locally that the churches were facing, and likely what it was the time of this writing would have been about the time that Nero was on the throne in Rome, and his persecution of the church very likely would have been starting to heat up, if you will. It could have been there could be other distresses, there could be other persecutions or things that were distressing to this Christian community, but the likely distress would be that outside persecution. So he's supposing, because of that distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. He says in verse 27, are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Well, do not seek a wife. But even if you do marry, he goes on, he says, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. So a couple things here. He's saying because of this present distress, he's saying, well, it might be good for you to just kind of just for this time stay as you are. If you're married, well, don't seek to be loose because you have all the other distresses around you. Don't bring that distress upon your life as well. But contrary-wise, there's a lot of persecutions. There's a lot of things, perhaps good reasons why somebody who, like he says, is loosed from a wife or who's unmarried. Maybe he's saying now's not the best time. Wait to see how this administration passes and see. Again, he's giving these points as advice, not as commandment. As he prefaced this, he's saying this is not a commandment from the Lord, but I'm giving you trustworthy advice. And he reiterates the point in verse 28 where he says, even if you do marry, while I might recommend to get against it at this present time because of certain distresses, it's not a sin. You have not sinned if you marry. And boy, are there people today that want to put marriage and starting a family as a grave sin. Oh, how can you bring kids into this world? How can you go forth and marry and start a family? Well, in the worldly religion of environmentalism and so on and so forth, they'll say, well, there's a present distress. We shouldn't marry. We shouldn't start a family. Well, Paul's saying here, no. If you do marry, you're not sinning in doing that. But it does come with a warning. He's saying here, nevertheless, at the end of verse 28, if you do marry, such will have trouble in the flesh. And isn't that true? No matter how perfect the relationship is, once marriage and families begin, well, you're concerned about more of the things. You have more of the weights of responsibilities. Bills come, money becomes tight, kids and everything come into the picture, and well, those will, as Paul reminds them here, those will cause trouble in the flesh, but it comes with a promise there at the end of that verse, I would spare you. And he is giving this advice in a sense that maybe if you followed it, you would be spared, but also you would be spared in this trouble because he is still recommending to them that they remain called as they are, whether you are bound to a wife, nevertheless of the trouble that you might experience in the flesh, remain and serve God as you are called. He goes on now in verse 29 to say, but this I say, brethren, the time is short. So he's reminding them of the brevity of the time overall, the brevity of time of life. We don't know when our card is called to be punched, when our time here is done. But nevertheless, we know that it's short. Man's life is but a vapor. It's but a blinking moment in time. And how did Shakespeare put it? There's the world's a stage, and the actors they come onto the stage, and just as they come, they also go. And this is how life is. Time is short for mortal souls. He goes on, so that from now on, even those who have wives should be as though as they had none. Well, now what? So. Well, that sounds pretty good. Even those that have wives, they should act as though they had none. So, okay, I'm going to plan a fishing trip next week, and then a hunting trip up north the week after, and then I'm going to go out with the guys after work here. And there. No, that's not what Paul's saying here. Paul's saying, just after he warned them about the troubles that will come in the flesh to those who are married, he's saying here, because this is all, again, in the perspective of the shortness of time, the brevity of time, and where our priorities should be, even amongst those who are married or those who are unmarried, our priority should be serving God with our entire heart. And so many times you talk to, most of this text has been talking to married individuals, but there's a great deal of advice for unmarried people, and a lot of times you talk to single people, and the most important thing that's on their mind, they just want to find someone. They just want to get married, and that consumes them. They see friends getting married, friends starting families, and so on and so forth, and they think, well, the human condition is what grass is always greener than the pasture that you're standing in at the moment. Instead of, like Paul's reminding them here, because time is short, serving God where you are and where you are called. And if it's God's design for you to find a spouse, then that will happen. But that's what he's saying here, because time is short. Even those who have wives, when he says that they should be as though they had none, he's not talking about, like I joked about, going off and doing your own thing, but be more attached to God in your walk and service of him than even your spouse. Because he goes on to say, look at verse 30. Those who weep, he says, be as those who do not weep. So do you have sorrows that are just weighing you down and all you want to do is cry? What Paul is teaching here is temperance, is moderation. Don't be as though as those who don't weep, even though you are those who weep. But he goes on, and those who rejoice, be as though they did not rejoice. So do you have reason to be exuberant and rejoicing at so many different things in your walk? Well, again, moderate that, and think of others in your humility, even though you have cause for rejoicing. He goes on, those who buy as though they did not possess. Is all of your concerns, everything in your walk, just about acquiring things, buying things, holding things? He's saying, don't be so connected to this world. Be as though they did not possess those things. And then verse 31, and then those who use this world as not misusing it. And he concludes this statement. So we started off talking about those with spouses be as though they had done. Those who weep, be as though they did not weep. Rejoicing as those who do not rejoice. Buying and possessing, using the world as not misusing it. And why does he say all these things? Again, it's to not have roots too deeply tied into this world. For why? For the form of this world is passing away. You see that? The form of this world, that's the form, another word is the fashion. You look at the culture of this world, and look back just 10 years ago. Look back just 10, 15 years ago, homosexual marriage was outlawed. You had most even prominent Democrats saying that, oh, well, no, marriage is still between a man and a woman, and so on and so forth. Well, the fashion of that world passed away pretty quickly, did it not? And we shouldn't think that the form that we're currently in, the fashion that we're currently in, is going to be here for very long. And that's encouraging to an extent, but we also know that while we don't think it could get worse, well, it sure could. It sure could. And ultimately, this world, we're not citizens here of this world. This world is not our primary citizenship, our primary home, because the form and the fashion of this world is temporary. Ultimately, it's passing away. But now, verse 32, Paul goes on to write, he says, but I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. And this is right to an extent. This is why Paul says he wishes that every man, he says that back in verse 7 of this chapter, he wishes that each one had his own gift of self-control, that he could prevail in the unmarried state. And it is true here, if you are unmarried, you have more time, more things freed up, that you can pay more attention to the cares and care for the things of the Lord. Not that all do, not that all unmarried take advantage of that gift of extra time to care for the things of the Lord and how he may please the Lord. But the principle is still there, that is, you are less encumbered by earthly things, so that you may be able to please the Lord more. But verse 33, he says, but he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife, which is right and a proper thing that a husband should do, even though it does take away some from caring for the things of the Lord. He is right in his earthly role as husband to care for the things of the world in that he might please his wife. But there, verse 34, there is a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband, just like he explained about the husbands. But he says in verse 35, and this I say for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you. Just like he started this passage off, he doesn't come with a commandment. He says, well, it might be good in this present time that you don't marry, but if you do, you haven't sinned. And same thing here. He's saying, I'm saying these things for your profit. These are trustworthy words of advice from the Apostle Paul, but he's not putting a leash and collar on you that you are bound by it. Well, boy, if you take a moment there and consider that, how different of a spiritual economy is Paul saying that we have, as opposed to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Levitical law of the Old Testament, where that was a leash, that was a collar. You were bound by that commandment. But Paul would have known that full well, studying at the feet of Gamaliel and being a Pharisee himself. He was all too familiar with religion that came bringing a leash and a collar. But he's saying this, no, here's advice, not that I put a leash on you, but for what is proper, that you may serve the Lord without distraction. That's why he can still say, you haven't sinned, you haven't done wrong if you get married, have a family. Even though these things are going to take place, he's saying you will have trouble in the flesh. You're not going to have as much time as you would have to serve the Lord, but you can still serve, and you can still serve God. Because why? Because you're not on a leash to be only one estate being acceptable to God. No, God called you where you are, and the important thing is serving the Lord, like he says, without distraction. So to the married people, make sure you carve out time for God in your walk. And to the unmarried people, don't use your extra time vainly. Use it in service of the Lord. Any questions or comments on any of this before we keep going on? All right, now verse 36 here. He says, if any man thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virgin. Now this is speaking of fathers now. Speaking of fathers towards his virgin daughters, unmarried daughters. If any man thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virgin, towards his daughter, if she is past the flower of her youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. So again, these are answering questions that the Corinthians bring up, and so they've asked obviously quite a bit about marriage, about conduct within the marriage, about unmarried, about single people. How should they conduct their lives? Should they seek marriage? So on and so forth. Well, now it's the question about a man with a unmarried daughter. Should he should he give her hand in marriage? Should he find a husband for her? And you see specifically here in verse 36, the question is pertaining to a daughter who is getting a bit on in age. He says if she is past the flower of her youth, he advises them, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let them marry. It is not wrong. You're not better off by just holding your daughter home and keeping her for marriage. And trust me, I wish maybe that he would say that, because I've got a young daughter, and I don't know if I want to give her hand in marriage when that day comes. But he's saying no. Let him do what he wishes, and if she finds a good, trustworthy young man, he does not sin in letting them marry. But verse 37, nevertheless, he says, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity but has power over his own will, and is so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin, well, he does well. So if there is a standfastness, well, it is well then if she does not marry. So then, verse 38. So then, he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. Well, again, these are just words of advice. Again, Paul advising them what is proper and how they might still best serve the Lord. For now, verse 39, it says, "A wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives. But if her husband dies, well, then she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. But," he says, "she is happier if she remains as she is, according to my judgment. And I think also I have the Spirit of God." So, concluding that passage there, just like he said elsewhere in chapter 7, if the woman becomes a widow, she's at liberty to be married again. Only as if she's seeking it with the Lord's will and his judgment. But again, Paul adding his own advice here, which he says he's pretty confident that this is godly, trustworthy advice because he has the Spirit of God indwelling in his writing, as we know by having his inspired letters as part of our canon, as part of our biblical canon that speaks to us 2,000 years after he penned it. So he says, in his judgment, if a woman becomes a widow, well, she is happier if she remains as she is. Again, just more godly advice from the Apostle Paul. Any questions, comments on any of that? We've got just a couple minutes left. He makes a change to a different topic here in chapter 8. So I think I might just read the first 3 verses, but we're gonna get into it more next time. So let's just get a preview, if you will, of what we'll be getting into next time when we get into 1 Corinthians chapter 8. He says in verse 1, "Now concerning things offered to idols." So already he starts with a turn in the subject. Starts just as he started chapter 7. Now concerning the things. So now concerning this next question that the Corinthians had, concerning the things offered to idols, he says, "Well, we know that we all have knowledge." So each person was given a measure of enlightenment, a measure of knowledge. But what does he say about knowledge? He says, well, knowledge puffs up like a balloon. It just puffs it up. But love, as he says here, love edifies. So puffs up, like I said, it's like a balloon. It's getting bigger, but it's full of nothing but air. Whereas love is something that edifies, something that actually builds up. If you're edifying something, you're blocking and mortaring a wall of bricks that's actually being built up. An edifice, exactly. So he says in verse 2, "If anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, this one is known by him." So this is the difference here between carnal knowledge. He's already spoken of elsewhere in this book about avoiding worldly wisdom, avoiding the things that would puff up in knowledge. And I love this verse here, verse 2, where he says, "If anyone even thinks that he knows something." Oh, you think you know something? Oh, you think you're smarter than God, and you can contradict the principles of God because you've studied it. You know better. Well, if you think you know anything, you don't know anything as you ought, because you're not governing that knowledge with love and with a godly perspective. But ultimately, he gives the contrast there to people who just pursue vain knowledge. If you begin your pursuit in knowledge with a love of God. If anyone loves God, this one is known by him. That means he's in a relationship. God is actively a part of his life and can impart that godly wisdom that tempers that knowledge, that doesn't take the earthly knowledge that we all have. And it's good. It's not, we're not completely dismissing knowledge, but knowledge must be put through the perspective, through the worldview lens um, of godly truth. And that is what loving God first. All wisdom begins with fearing, having reverence and love towards your creator, God. So that is just a preview of what we're going to be getting into next time, chapter 8. Any other questions, comments before we close? All right, Brother Phil, would you mind closing us in a word of prayer then?
Dear Lord, we thank you for this portion of the word and the truth contained in it. And we just pray your blessing on the services to follow, that your name may be glorified. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.